Weak systems of governance and the absence of the rule of law both combine to form the perfect stage for corruption to flourish. As part of our anti-corruption fight at Kaieteur Radio, we invite you to join us every Tuesday evening from 7:30 p.m. as we embark on a most needed quest to remove the tentacles of corruption from our systems. See you then for our latest program called Governance, Corruption, and Justice. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of Governance, Corruption, and Justice. I'm yours truly, hostess of the program and editor at Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilberg, and tonight we will be placing the spotlight on the mining sector and specifically the role of the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission's Environmental Division, where the mining industry is concerned. To help us with tonight's discussion is a senior environmental officer, Mr. Darcy Walren. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, Mr. Walren, just introduce yourself for us. Tell us a bit about how long you've been at GGMC and a bit about how long you have been serving as the senior environmental officer.
Okay, well, my tenure at the GGMC has started somewhat over 12 years now. I've been attached to the environmental division from the beginning as an environmental officer, and then I've been promoted twice within the division over the 12-year period. And so just a bit more about myself. My background was actually, my undergrad was in mining engineering, and then I furthered my studies and I did a master's in environmental engineering and project management. So I'm well-versed and well-rounded when it comes to understanding the mining sector and also having a strong environmental background as well.
Excellent. So with that background, I'd like to head straight into our discussion tonight.
Sure.
Now, in Guyana, mining is generally permissible in 6 designated districts, and altogether, this would span across 45.8 million acres. So that's a lot of land we're talking about.
Yes.
Now, what have been some of your observations over the years as it relates to monitoring this wide expanse of land?
Well, in the beginning, especially when I just started at GGMC, it was a lot more difficult, whereas, traversing these large terrains, especially when you had to do a lot of walking and transportation costs, access with the roads and stuff like that was not as easy. But as times progressed, it has become a bit more easier to traverse within these different mining districts, as we would call them, or mining districts.
Okay.
But it is still a challenge in a sense to actively monitor. We've increased our monitoring capabilities immensely, but we still find some challenges because of the nomadic nature of mining in itself. Where we can see a miner here today, and in 2 days they can literally pack up and move at a different location. So we find some challenges when we try to keep a constant monitoring of individuals, but through the government under the tutelage of the Ministry of Natural Resources, we've learned they've incorporated more of a multi-stakeholder approach also to monitoring and evaluating the mining sector. So on in the ministry now, we also have core wardens. We work collaborations now with EPA, Ministry of Labor. So we try to take a multi-stakeholder approach now, even within the commission itself, because we have 3 core divisions as well. So we have a mines division, we have an environmental division, we have a geotechnical division, geoservices division. And even with that, we try to pool our resources so that we can continue to do active monitoring, because the mining sector in itself, it's extensive and it's large. And even with some of the challenges with staffing, we try to make sure that we utilize as much as possible so that we can effectively try to monitor the mining sector.
To what extent do you use technological assistance as part of your monitoring process?
That is something that we've started now to incorporate a bit more. We're like in the mines division, they're now starting to use the implementation of drones to try and cover some of these large areas, so we can try and identify miners that we may not have had a documentation or something like that, or may not be able to visit before, because we just don't know where they were at that particular time. So that's one of the approaches we've definitely started to take, where we're using drones now to cover areas so we can try and identify or pinpoint more miners as possible.
Okay, and how many persons make up your environmental division?
Well, we are a modest unit. There's only 26 of us within the environmental division that do environmental compliance monitoring. We also are responsible for occupational health and safety as well.
Would you say that you're definitely in need of more individuals to cover 45.8 million acres?
Definitely, that's one of our limitations. But as I would say, the commission, there's one thing about the commission, it's not just an environmental, we don't just look at it as an environmental division problem, we look at it as a multi-state divisional problem as well. So as much as we may not have officers actively on the ground all the time, we also pull from the other divisions as the mines division. So like we would get information, and information sharing is key within the commission itself. So if like the mines division, they come across a challenge, they would pass on that information to us, officers will go out, and vice versa. So, because most of our officers are also now being gazetted as mines officers as well, so that we can take up the roles if an officer, say if the mines division is not there and we are there, we can take up that responsibility. Whereas the mines division also, they can help us in a sense. So, and if they find some amount of challenges and stuff, they relay that information to us, and we have officers who will go out and try and address some of those situations and problems.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, one of the issues that we would have observed here at Kaieteur News during our own investigations is that you have the exploitation of the land, but then you see sometimes these large craters that are left with these huge pools of water. Sometimes it's green, sometimes it's blue. What really is the policy of GGMC ensuring that there's proper restoration of these lands after they've been exploited for their resources?
Well, reclamation, it's part of our regulations, especially the environmental regulations, which is our 205 regulations. And it has now been pushed to the forefront, whereas now we as a commission, led by the environmental division, now have started to do demonstration sites. So we actually have 7 demonstration sites that we've done to reclaim the land, to show that it can be reclaimed to a point where it can naturally revegetate, or we look for alternative uses, if via agriculture or commercial or recreational. So one of the challenges we've noticed is, one, lack of knowledge that reclamation is required by law. 2, it's more of sensitization as well. So we're pushing a strong campaigns, one, to do education and awareness. So now we're actively going out into the areas to basically bring people up to speed as to why reclamation is important, because it is part of the entire responsible mining process. I think in Guyana they just look at it as, we just mine just to get out the gold, but we don't understand exactly. Yeah. But that is not part of what is called responsible mining. Responsible mining is from planning from the beginning to ending, which is closure, which is part of reclamation, which is reclaim the land to a point where it can be used properly and effectively. Because it's not just us, it's our generations we have to look at also.
Indeed. Now, how often is the compliance check or audit done by the environmental division to ensure those who've been sensitized about the need for land reclamation, that they're actually adhering to the advice or guidance that's been passed on to them?
One of the challenges with that as well is because this is why we look at alternative technologies as well. One of the problems with reclamation is that our recovery rates of gold is pretty low. The technologies that we use right now is pretty low. So because we use the sluicing method, which is hydraulicking over a sluice box or mat, we try to recover the gold. However, that's not efficient. We lose close to like 70% of the gold. So one of the issues we have is that depending on the gold price, it may not be feasible to mine 1 ounce today, But if the gold price goes up to, say, $3,000 an ounce, it is feasible. So miners will go back to that area. So one of the areas, the challenges we find with reclamation is that because we don't recover all the gold properly, miners will keep on revisiting an area. So the inclination or the encouragement to go and reclaim the land to the point where it's not being used again it's a challenge. And so even with that knowledge and awareness now, we're trying to, that's why the commission is promoting better technologies of recovery, so that when an area is used, it is exhausted to the point where, okay, only reclamation is left. And yeah, so that's one of the challenges we are facing. So this is why we're promoting and encouraging alternative technologies to have better recovery rates.
Okay. Now I want to look at mining with the use of mercury for a bit. And this is something that the APNU AFC administration, as well as the current government, PPPC, both have said that we need to make serious efforts towards phasing out mercury from mining or eliminating one of the two. And so far what we've seen is that in the meantime, there have been environmental effects as well as the effects on the health of those individuals or communities that are in proximity to mining using mercury. So what has been some of the challenges of the environmental division in terms of managing the use of mercury in mining?
All right. I would like start off. I would say mercury on a whole. It's been, especially since Guyana is now a signatory onto the Minamata Convention, and the Minamata Convention is the main driver of reducing mercury use, or where feasible, the phasing out of mercury. So we're at the stage right now where we're developing under our obligations a NAP, a National Action Plan, to deal with mercury. And so part of the NAP, it is to, a lot of people always say eliminate, but the convention speaks to phased reduction. Where feasible, you try to eliminate. We understand the challenges with mercury because, one, it's easily accessed because it's cheap, it's easy to understand or use by miners, and it doesn't require a lot of technical skills. It doesn't that. And this is why we also, like I mentioned before, we're trying to promote technologies where we, which is mercury-free technologies, where we don't have to use mercury, which aids in our reduction. So we have our mineral processing unit that has done extensive work on showing different types of technologies, which is like the shaking tables. They've had gold bowls, different types of technologies where we can recover gold without using mercury. And to basically show miners that it is possible. We understand the challenges also of cost that may be attached to it as well. And so there are different parameters and mechanisms that are being used. They have, and it is not just a GGMC or environmental problem. We have other partners, which is like the EPA. We have CI International. We have the Mercury Gold Project, where they're trying to come up with alternatives to mercury, to deal with mercury. So mercury use is a national, it's looked as a national issue where we are all trying under the convention, because we are a part of the Minamata Convention. So what we've done, especially within the commission, when it comes to mercury management, especially for the mining sector, because we were considered as significant, the ASGM sector or the mining sector is considered significant because of the amount of mercury we use. So we've put things in place based on our regulations, which are 205 regulations, which speaks to how we use and handle mercury. So you do not use it in an open system. It must be always in a closed system where it does not escape into the environment. We endorse the use of retards, where miners must use a retard when they're burning their amalgam in their amalgam process. So these are the things we get to monitor and check against to try and bring at least some amount of reduction in the amount of mercury that may be released. We're also doing projects right now where we're looking at the efficiencies of, let's say, your gold shops, which are also indirect use of mercury releases into the environment. So we're looking at how we can improve the technologies so that those releases do not escape back into the environment. We're also doing another project where we're even testing the efficiencies of the different capture systems that are being used in the industry, so that we're at the point where we're trying to meet the obligations of reduction where we're trying to reduce the amount of mercury being released into the environment. We are also being able to track as when it comes to the importation of mercury through a MOU with the Ministry of Natural Resources, the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, PTCB, Toxic Board, and the EPA. So they've come with an MOU now. So we have checks and balances now to see where the mercury is coming from, quantities, and who it's going to be distributed to or sold to, so that we now could also track, at the beginning stage to start be able to track where our mercury is going, how much and what quantities we have, and how it's being used within the sector as well.
When was that MOU signed?
I think I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was 2018 or 2019.
Okay. And since then, you've been able to see how this has been useful in ensuring the efforts of reduction are achieved?
Yes, well, at least when it comes to being able to know how much mercury a distributor can bring in, and then we've reduced those amounts. We're trying to reduce those amounts year by year by year. So, and we also limit how much a person can bring in per year. So, right, so there's a cap.
So that's being done
actively as it is right now, yes.
Okay. So, in terms of the impact of mercury on the environment, how is that being studied from the environmental division? Are you monitoring the effects?
Well, the health effects that's basically under the Ministry of Health, which is captured in the NAP, because the NAP document will address or speak to health issues as to what are some of the health effects or some of the health causes that are being caused from mercury being used in the mining sector. So the National Action Plan will have a part, because they had a consultant who did research for part of the NAP to capture. So we have the health, socioeconomic, mining, and legal. Whereas we look at gaps within our regulations to see how we can strengthen regulations to help reduce or, like I said, phase down or, if possible and feasible, the phasing out of mercury. So within the division itself, the environmental division, we've done studies where we've done some soil sampling in some mining areas. One, to help with misinformation, because I can give you a perfect example where in the Northwest, it was reported that, it was mercury that was poisoning the water and stuff like that. And then when we actually did tests in the area, and we went and we did tests, we found that it was not mercury. There is some amount of misconception because of mining and the releases that there is, this predominant release of mercury that is affecting people and stuff like that. And so we're trying to do it from a fact-finding basis as well, and knowledge gathering, because there's a lot of projects now that are going on out there. I know CI now is doing a project. We are also doing a project now where we've actually done one in the Bartica area, where we've actually done air sample testing around the community at mining shops that buy and sell gold and stuff like that. So we've done different studies that have been able to identify some of the areas where we find emission releases are maybe a bit higher, or we also get to be able to show that, listen, there's nothing here. So it is a collective effort, one, and two, it is an ongoing exercise. It's not going to be just restricted to it, because we also find that there are studies that have been done, like I think it was GenCap, I think that was in 2007, or something, if I'm not mistaken, where you actually found elevated levels of mercury in Amerindians that were far away from mining communities as well. So, it's a case where we just have to do more groundwork, as in research, to be able to clearly identify. But we do know that there is a release of mercury from the mining sector, and we at the Commission are doing our best in collaboration with our regulations, because our regulations definitely speak to mercury. We have a code of practice that speaks to mercury as well. So we try our best, one, sensitization, knowledge sharing, working with the miners to make them understand. And we've also identified some of our, like through the NAP, some of our gaps in our regulations which we can strengthen, so that we can ensure that mercury releases and emissions are being reduced. Oh, and I can't believe I forgot this one. And we've also working on standards for mercury releases as well with the Bureau of Statistics. So Bureau standards. So we're actually trying to develop now standards for emissions and releases into the environment as well.
And how soon do you expect those standards would be completed? Is
Um,
there a timeline for that, as well as for the completion of NAP?
well, the NAP document is in the finalized stage right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's just been reviewed. The final document has been reviewed for comments and so that it can be approved. When it comes to relation to the standards, we're at the stage where we're actually revising some of the standards that were proposed so we can put it out for public consultation and basically do more sensitization about what the standards are for and why we chose some of the limits for what for releases and emissions as well.
Okay. Now let's look at mining accidents for a few. Now, mining pit cave-ins, it's been one of the uh, major areas of concern for fatalities in the mining sector. Can you say how the GGMC rather has been monitoring this particular matter, and what statistics, if you can provide for us, on the reduction level of mining accidents, and what GGMC has been doing to ensure miners are sensitized about what they need to do to avoid such cases?
Yeah. So the first approach, definitely for us, it's education and awareness.
Okay.
We understand that miners are wired for gold, and unfortunately, being wired for gold, also, we've noticed that miners are willing to take the risks that are associated with being wired for gold and ignoring the danger signs, as they would say. So one of our key focal points within the environmental division is to continue to do continuous education and awareness. So when officers go out, we go out with reading materials. We've even developed now DVDs. We're also done more. We've understood. We even took questionnaires to find out which is the best way that we can put the message over that it can be received by miners. So we do a lot of personal interactions with workers, with the GMs. Through the mining school now, we're doing training for GMs so that they can be able to identify and associate risks when it comes to mining. Within the environment division, we've also decided now we're going to take a technical approach to it as well, to understand the engineering principles that are needed to help safeguard miners. So we're actually doing a project right now in the Madia area where we're going to take geotechnical work and so we can be able to say, okay, based on these conditions, this is the best type of mine that should be done. This is the bench height we should have. These are the slopes that should be used in this type of soil. Because from our studies and stuff like that, we've been able to see that a lot of them within the past, like a 10-year period, we saw 33% of these accidents occur in the rainy season. And so that gives you an idea now that, okay, in the rainy season, the soil's going to act differently because there's a lot more water that is being involved now. We've also been able to identify that a lot of accidents happen in areas that were reworked. So we're not working in pristine areas. So in areas that are being reworked as unconsolidated soils. So the soil parameters now are different. And they're not as stable as if it was a consolidated material. Or you go into areas where you might see it's predominantly sand, or you might find clays. And so we're taking engineering principles now to come up with solutions to help safeguard miners against accidents. And we're going to try to use these principles to educate the miners themselves and even help develop mine plans, to help them develop mine plans so that they can work in a way that is safe to protect themselves. But at the end of the day, it is about sensitization to the point where we make them understand that the risk of going after gold is not worth your life. Because we've even had instances where we would interview miners and then you'd say, hey, do you see some of the dangers here? And they can identify it for you. But then you ask them why. Why are you still working? They will say, well, boss, if we don't go after it, how we can feed our families? Then we try to explain to them, but how could you feed your family if you're dead? Mm-hmm. So, it's to change the mindset as well. And that's one of our key drivers, to try and understand and change a mindset where we understand, where we push safety as a priority over being wired for gold.
Now, do you have any statistics that you can share with us in terms of how many mining accidents specifically caused by pit cave-ins?
Well, I can give you for the past 5 years, we had about 51 fatalities from 2017 to 2021.
Wow.
Where 54% were roughly was from pit wall failures. And the next highest identification for mining fatalities was tree falls, which accounted for like 35% within a past 5-year period. And so for this year, thank God, this number is significantly reduced. So we've only had 3 fatalities for this year, well, mining-related fatalities, as we would say, where 2 were tree fall and 1 was a pitfall for 2021.
Okay.
Right, which is reduced from 2020, where we saw 13.
13
Fatalities. Yes,
from,
yes.
mining
We're
activities.
13 in all for last year, mining related fatalities. 7 was from pitfall failures in 2020.
Okay. Now, on that note, I'd like to ask you a bit about the extent to which GGMC is pushing green technologies, green practices to ensure safer and less polluting mining operations.
So as I've mentioned, I mentioned earlier,
Yes.
this is where especially our mineral processing unit, they've been working tirelessly to show different technologies. One for recovery, which helps improve recovery, because we understand improved recovery means improved money for the miners themselves, and it helps reduce your footprint, as they would say, on the ground. We're also advocating now for miners to do more reconnaissance work, where they do better prospecting, as they would call it, or drill core sampling, so they can know where their ores are, because generally we do the hit and miss method in the mining sector. So we're trying to take it to more engineering approaches, where miners now, and we're advocating for it and we're pushing for it, so miners to do proper sampling so they know where the goal is, instead of just going to dig a hole and then if it doesn't produce something, then they just move on to the next one. So we're definitely advocates for that right now. We're pushing for that more. Different technologies, as I would say, also reduces the use of mercury, which is something very important to us as well. So we're definitely pushing. That is the general direction or push the commission is trying to do right now to encourage miners. And then also we work with other stakeholders as well. So it's not just GGMC approach. And this is one thing the government is taking. We understand it's a multi-stakeholder approach. It's all of us. It's not just about GGMC. As much as we're the stewards for the mining sector, we understand that other agencies can aid in this as well. So CI is doing projects. We have a Planet Gold project right now, which talks about better recovery mechanisms and equipment for gold. I know even down to the Miners Association themselves are promoting alternative technologies, and they're doing experiments and different trials to help recover gold. So this is something that we can eventually spread on to all miners as well.
Okay. Now, on that note, I'd like to ask you for your concluding thoughts on the importance of responsible mining practices in the mining sector, as well as what are some of the final goals that the environmental division intends to achieve before we reach the end of 2021, and what's basically the vision or the outlook for 2022?
Well, for us, we're not just looking for the end of this year. We're looking at 5-year strategic plans, so for us it's basically to reduce mining fatalities at least in the next 5 years, at least by 75%. So because we believe that everyone should go home. We're strong stewards because this is for livelihood, this is families, this is communities. We understand this is for our country as well. Mining is for our country. Mining helps to drive our economy. So for us, 75% reduction, at least over a 5-year period, of mining fatalities. That's one of our main drivers. Also, the streamlining of reclamation, because we understand that we have to be responsible to get our environment back to a state where it can naturally, if it's revegetate for itself, or we find other alternative economic uses for the land, or put it to a point where we can have alternative economic uses. So those are one of the 2 major drivers. Recoveries, can't speak enough about that, because that is one of our drivers. One that will enhance the industry to the point where it is more sustainable, because it helps us to reduce our footprints for the environment. It helps to meet some of our obligations, not just to the Minamata Convention, but we also have many other conventions that we sign at the LCDS and all these government initiatives as well. So better recovery technologies is definitely something that the Commission in itself is advocate for. Me personally, I'm passionate about the Mercury, so the Minamata Convention. So a lot of our projects now are geared towards helping Guyana reach some of those obligations under the convention. So continued, Mercury assessments in different areas, taking up more geological surveys, and identifying areas where we might see Mercury releases, promoting the standards, trying to get us to the point where we actually have standards now for releases. And like I said, we also work and continue collaborative efforts with other agencies, which is the EPA, Ministry of Labor, CI, MNR, because that's our ministry. So we understand that we're going to continue to work collaboratively with all of these agencies as well under the leadership of the Ministry of Natural Resources.
All right. Mr. Walron, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be part of the program tonight, Governance, Corruption, and Justice. And we thank you for your insightful perspectives. We do hope we can have you back on the program sometime soon. So once again, thank you to our listeners and our viewers. As always, we are very appreciative of your participation in tonight's program, and we do look forward to having you back next week, same time, same place, for more insightful discussions on our industries and all the issues that are related to governance, corruption, and justice. With that being said, please continue to stay safe, wear your masks, and practice social distancing. Thank you and good night. Mr. Walron, good night again.
Take care. Thank you.